All right, so we are in Galatians chapter 3, and we're right in that 10 to 15, around in there, this section. And I want to make sure that we remember what is taking place here. We have these objectors, people that are saying, Paul, you are trying to claim that a Gentile can come straight to Jesus, come straight to the cross, can get salvation without him having to actually do anything. And they say that's what the law of Moses is for. The law of Moses is what makes Israel distinct, Israel being the promised seed from Genesis chapter 12. Therefore, if somebody wants to come to Christ, they must first come through the law of Moses. They must join with Israel. And once they've done that, then they have salvation open to them. And this is kind of the objection that is behind this. And this is one where you read between the lines as you're reading Galatians and Romans and others, and you say, okay, let's look at Paul's answers, his responses. What was he dealing with? This seems to be a key objection. If Israel, Paul, the way that you teach it, if you say that a Gentile can come straight to Jesus without coming through Israel, therefore if Israel no longer serves a purpose, then that means that God failed his promise. And that is, going back to Genesis chapter 12, because they see that Israel, with the covenant, this is the fulfillment. That Israel entered into a covenant, and so these people are also joining into this covenantal relationship. Does everybody understand the objection? Again, this is what the objectors say. This is not what Paul's teaching, right? This is what Paul is having to answer. So, that's what brings us up here in Galatians chapter 3. And I'm just going to start there in verse 10. We've already talked about some of this. For all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, cursed be everyone who does not abide by all things written in the book of the law and do them. Now it's evident that no one is justified before God by the law, for the righteous shall live by faith. But the law is not of faith. Rather, the one who does them shall live by them. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree, so that in Christ Jesus the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith. So this is where Paul is setting up a Gentile who comes to the cross through what? Through faith. Yeah, this is the very last words, right? That he says, through faith. So Paul says that a Gentile can just come straight to the cross simply through faith. They would say, no, he has to come through the works of the law. He has to become part of the covenant. He has to be part of the covenant people of Israel. And so we're looking at justification by works of the law of Moses, right? Not just works, but works of the law of Moses compared to by faith. Let's follow his argument then, starting in verse 15. To give a human example, brothers, even with a man-made covenant, no one annuls it or adds to it once it has been ratified. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. It does not say and to offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ. This is what I mean. The law, which came 430 years afterwards, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God so as to make the promise void. For if the inheritance comes by the law, it no longer comes by promise, but God gave it to Abraham by a promise. All right, so let's start breaking down. What is it that he's talking about here when he talks about man-made covenants and annulling them? We're getting into the part of Galatians you're probably more familiar with. I'm guessing, people spend more time in this section of chapter 3 than what you do in the other sections. So, don't be scared. What's that?
Contracts.
Okay, yeah. Covenants, contracts. The idea of a covenant, we've talked about this before. It's like a contract. It's very much, it has a legally binding feel to it, but it is much more personal than just simply a contract itself. But as Kelly is saying, you have this idea of annulling a contract or a covenant after what? All right, after you've ratified it. All right. So where is Paul then going to take the discussion to? Which contract? All right, he's going to take us back to Genesis chapter 12, and he's going to say that Genesis chapter 12 stands on its own without reference to what? The law. All right, without reference to the law of Moses right here, that is this covenant. See, they tied these together. And this is where you get one of those, fun word type of things that you guys are familiar with. When Paul, the ESV says offspring here, how many of y'all, your translations have the word seed? Okay. All right. I really like the word seed here. I don't know why you would necessarily use a different one. And this is verse 16. Promises made to Abraham and to his seed. It does not say and to seeds, referring to many, but to one, and to your seed. Why would Paul have to say that? Okay, because they thought the seed is Israel, which is a many, right? Here's the question, though. If it's a singular, then why in the world would they assume that... y'all understand his argument, right? Seed is singular, not plural. Seed, not seeds, right? Everybody understands that. Why would they have ever assumed that a singular seed would fit there? Kelly?
That in Spanish, the family is one unit.
Okay.
It's a lot of people, but it's one unit in the Spanish way of thinking. I don't know if that's what's going on with this, but some cultures think of things a little differently than we do.
Okay. All right. So it is very possible that Israel, being a corporate noun, can be seen as a singular, and that's the way they could have understood it. Very good. What else? Why else might they have understood it as the many of Israel? Have any of y'all sown seed before? Anybody here actually done that? Yeah? So you went out to the garden and put a single seed down in the ground? Right? Wait, when you sowed seed, how many did you sow? Yeah, a lot, because the word seed can be either singular or plural. Interestingly enough, it works the same way in the Greek. It works the same way in the Hebrew. It's not a definitive singular or plural noun. It's like seed or deer in the English language, or those types of things. Paul is actually here doing something to make it plural, like forcing it to some degree to make it plural, so that he can make this distinction. That as it's written, it could be singular or plural, either one, in the Hebrew. How did they understand it? They understood it as plural, that there are many seeds out there. That is Israel. Obviously, Israel is the seed that is going to be sown into the world, type of an idea, and all the world's going to be blessed by it. And Paul says, guys, what if we were wrong about that? Now, it's easy for us because we've grown up reading Genesis chapter 3, right? How many of y'all already knew the singular versus plural discussion? You've heard this before. You've gone through it, right? You already knew what Paul was going to say. Therefore, it's easy for us to say, well, duh. What's wrong with you dumb ancient Israelites? Why couldn't you get this? Well, it's because it was very nebulous. It's ambiguous in the text. And it took an understanding after the fact to look back after it's revealed and then understand the way it's supposed to be. Kelly, do you have a... Oh, okay. Does this make sense? Yeah, comment up here. And, keep in mind, Paul is talking to these people who have grown up understanding it this way. So, yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
I guess I just was going to make a comment that it's good that they had this argument then, because from our vantage point, if we didn't have Galatians and we were reading the old text and they hadn't had this argument discussion,
yeah,
we would be just like they were in trying to figure this out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's where a lot of these arguments come into play, that once they're explained, and he says it's a singular seed, which is Christ, and then the light bulb goes off and you say, oh, but it's easy to miss it. As Kevin says, we might even still miss it if this exchange doesn't take place, if Paul doesn't have to defend what he's defending here. And so he says, look, there's nothing inherent about Israel being the answer to Genesis chapter 12. They don't put an end to the promise in Genesis 12. You know what I mean by putting an end to it? As in it fulfills it. He promised it in Genesis 12, and then the seed is there. And you could say Exodus 24, which we'll be talking about Sunday night, or other things. We could say once Israel fulfills it, well, then it's finished at that point. Or the word that Paul uses here, annulled. Is that the case? Once Israel and their covenant come onto the scene, does that end the usefulness of the Abrahamic covenant? No, that's Paul's point. And you could even go a step further if you wanted to. Go back to Noah's covenant. Or go back to Adam's covenant. All of these covenants are not just put to a complete end because the next one comes, or the next one comes, or the next one comes. They're all built, really, upon each other. And they kind of push forward everything all the way until the time that Jesus comes, and he is the one who brings about the fulfillment of all of these. Does that make sense? Paul's argumentation here. They would say, hey, if Israel no longer serves a purpose, then God failed the promise. And Paul would say, that's ridiculous. Of course God doesn't fail his promise. We just have misunderstood the promise. And usually that's the way it is, right? If we find something in the Bible and we're like, okay, there's a problem here, and the problem is either me or God. What's usually the problem? It's the me, right? I say usually. I don't even have to say usually. The problem's me. If there's an issue that's either me or God, I'm the one who is the issue. So that's his argument here. He says in verse 18, if inheritance comes by the law, that is, if inheritance of being part of God's people is all about this and this only, then is it really something that comes by a promise any longer? He says, no. but God gave it to Abraham through a promise. So, verse 19, we come to this question, and this is a question you find in Romans as well. It's one of the questions that I had up here on the board during our introductory discussion, objections that they would have. And I could have written this down as well, where they would say, okay, Paul, let's just say for just a second that you're right. These are the objectors. Let's just say for a second, Paul, that you're right, that Israel no longer serves a purpose. Then how do you explain the fact that God gave Israel the law, gave them their special place in the world, treated them with such kindness, protected them, helped them, and brought them along all the way to this point? And Paul, you're saying that God did all of that for Israel just to give them the boot here in the end? That doesn't make any sense. Can you see their argument? They're saying, I'm looking at history. I'm looking at what God's done. Why did God even give the law in the first place if we're going to come to a point in time that it's not going to be necessary for someone to adhere to it in order to find salvation? Verse 19, why the law? Well, why? Why does he say it? It was given? All right, because of transgressions. What does that mean? The law was given because of transgressions. My throat's getting sore. I'm going to let you talk for a little bit here. It's not really getting sore, but go ahead. Kelly.
I'm not doing a very good job with playing Let's Read Chris's Mind tonight.
Hey,
but
that's all right.
there's other places where Paul talks about if the law hadn't been around, I wouldn't know what sin was.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
All right. So that brings up Romans chapter 7, which, incidentally, is the other place in Romans where Paul is having to answer this question, why the law? And yeah, I think, Kelly, there's a lot of connection that you're going to find between that discussion and what Paul is doing here in Galatians. And yeah, it has to do transgressions, sinfulness, a sinful people. We kind of talked about this on this past Sunday night. What is Israel's purpose in the world? When they're created, what is their purpose? All right, to be a priesthood. Very good. They serve as the nation priest for all the other nations. And so they are given a special law, special rules for holiness that sets them apart from the rest so that they can serve in that capacity. They do that because you go all the way back to the very beginning, what happened? All right, sin entered into the world. And what came with it? Death through sin. Therefore, we all die because all have sinned, right? So, we come all the way back to the very beginning. This whole trajectory of salvation has everything to do with transgressions, with sinfulness. And if everybody is just left to figure it all out by themselves without any help other than the moral law that is built within us, if God never steps down and says, here are expectations, how well do you think mankind is going to figure it all out? Probably not very well, right? Yeah, Kelly?
When I first started coaching wrestling, my team rules were pretty much, be a good person in school, be a good person at the meet. act right, behave yourself. Like, that's all I had to say. And the majority of my kids got it. But the last couple of years of coaching wrestling, I had to detail, this is what it looks like to be a good person in the hallway. This is what it looks like to be a good person in the wrestling room. This is what it looks like to be a good person sitting on the side of the... And I had to be very specific about what it was. I don't know if that's... As that culture of student body deteriorated in their morals, I had to be a lot more specific with them about what it was that was expected of them.
Yeah, that's very good. And that, I think, is exactly what's taking place, because if there is no guidance from above coming down, does Israel, are they any different from any other nation at that point? No. So the law of Moses is there because of the sinfulness of mankind, that sin is a part of the world, and Israel is meant to bypass that to some degree. I mean, that's kind of what the law is supposed to do. Yeah, Joe?
Leading up to Richard's Hebrews class, we had talked about the tabernacle and temple, and how that was the earthly representation of heaven on earth. Mm-hmm. And reading this verse, it reminded me of that, and how the Israelites were, as you were talking, that they were a tutor, or the example for other nations. And it reminded me of how we've said in the past about how the tabernacle and Israelites were a tutor for others.
Well, hold that thought for just a minute, because that's where we're headed.
Okay.
So we'll get there in just a second, because this is the passage that talks about that very thing. But as Joe brings up, the idea of the tabernacle, the temple, and remember when we talked about this, not only does it look forward to heaven, but it also does what? In fact, you could say, what was the blueprint for the tabernacle and the temple? It was first what? Yeah, the Garden of Eden. It begins with the Garden of Eden, and it has all the garden imagery throughout, and then that's the focus, the picture at the very end, when you look at Revelation chapter 22, which uses some of that same type of language. And so you see this connection that stems to a life the way it's supposed to be, pre-sin, the way that God wanted, He created the relationship to be. Genesis chapters 1 and 2 before Genesis chapter 3. So He gives the law to His people. And He says, this is how you can abide in such a way, you can live in such a way that if you follow these precepts and you do what you're supposed to do, this will keep you from sin. I mean, that's basically how it's laid out. And at the same time, it will purify you in a certain way to live as a priesthood. So, coming down to verse 21, is the law then contrary to the promises of God? Of course not. If a law had been given that could give life, then righteousness would indeed be by the law. And I think it's important that we understand this. Part of the objection that people have against Paul when they say, why did God give the law? They assume that when Paul says a Gentile does not need the law of Moses in order to come to Christ, that he can come without it. There seems to be an assumption that Paul thinks there's something wrong with the law of Moses, that he thinks it's flawed in some way. And so you see Paul very often saying, let's talk about how good the law is, how perfect the law is. Was the law perfect? Should have a bunch of salt shakers here. 100% perfect. The law was 100% absolutely perfect for what it was meant to accomplish. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It laid out the relationship, the guidelines of the relationship, how they were supposed to live in the relationship, the purpose of the relationship, the purity of the relationship. Everything was laid out perfectly among the law, and they were given the means by which, if that relationship from Israel was severed because of impurity, the means were there to bring them back into a proper relationship with the rest of Israel once again through the various sacrifices, so they could return back to the covenant people. The law was perfect for what it was meant to do. So what's the problem then? Why do we have an issue then sometimes thinking about the law? Ryan?
Because it didn't give opportunity for forgiveness of sin.
All right. Yeah, the one thing, or not the one thing, there was probably many things, but one of the main things that the law was never meant to accomplish was to forgive sins. And by forgive sins, I mean very specifically the vertical relationship. When you have sinned against God, that cannot be undone by any sacrifice within the law of Moses itself. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
But at the same time, it was designed to set up the life of Christ, the life of Jesus, so that he could be that sacrificial lamb.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a discussion, Romans 3, what is around verse 21, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been manifest or made known through Jesus. That is to say, there is no dying Messiah for your sins in the law of Moses. That's outside of it. It's apart, separate from the law. But as Ryan says, the law is what builds the foundation upon which Jesus and the Messiah coming is all about. So let's go to this discussion then that Joe brought up just a second ago. So verse 22, Scripture imprisoned everything under sin, so the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to the ones who believe. Now, before faith came, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned by the coming faith which would be revealed. So then, the law was our what? Everyone just blurt it out. What do you have there? The law was our, say it. Man, does everyone use the New King James here? Huh? All right, guardian, all right. Schoolmaster, I know Kevin said that from the Old King James. New King James and I think New American Standard use the word tutor. The ESV uses the word guardian. I think the NIV, or at least the old RSV does. And I think the NIV that it's based off of also might use the word guardian. Why so many different words? Because those are different words, right? Schoolmaster, tutor, guardian. There was another one, wasn't there? Nope. Okay. But I'm thinking that there was another one that I usually throw out when I have this discussion, but it's not coming to me. Why such a diversity? I mean, the word's what the word is, right? Okay. All right, Josie says it's been translated. The problem is it's a translation of a system that we don't use anymore. We're not familiar with it. We don't have familiarity, so translators look at it and they say, well, what am I supposed to do with this? All right, this word will work, or this one, or whatever the case might be. The word literally is a child trainer. Have you guys been through this whole discussion before? The idea of a child trainer, and this is part of a system in antiquity where wealthier individuals would have their children trained from a young age all the way through. And quite frankly, these children had absolutely zero status when it came right down to it. They were no better than anybody, any of the servants in the house or anything like that, because the father doesn't want an untrained child speaking for the family because he has the name of the family and bringing disgrace upon the family. So until the father says, hey, it's okay, that child is basically no better off than anyone else as far as status is concerned. And he brings in a trainer, a child trainer, somebody whose purpose is to basically be there to raise the child, to know the fundamentals of what we would call elementary, junior high, high school, that type of stuff. Understanding all the classic things that they need to know, but also how to live. How to be a functioning person in polite society, how to do the things that need to be done. The father's way too busy to do this. That's why he hires someone to come in and do it. And so this is the person who lays all the groundwork of teaching so that when the father deems that this guy is not going to make a mockery of the family name, he then sends the child to a master teacher. And so the master teachers are going to be the ones, such as Aristotle was the master teacher for Alexander the Great. That type of scenario. So we don't use this system. We don't have a name for that person. That training individual. That's why some people use educational terms like schoolmaster or tutor. But the problem is that those carry baggage that this doesn't, or totally miss the point. Like the word tutor, I think is a horrible translation for this word. Because when we think of a tutor is somebody who comes in when you need a little help every now and then leaves, right? Oh man, I'm falling behind in math. I need someone to come and teach me some math and tutor me and help me get better at this. But then they're gone. And that's not at all what this is. This is a permanent position that has to do everything. Schoolmaster is not, that fits educationally, but then again, it's a little too high, because schoolmasters are over the things that happen in a school, per se. Guardian, I can understand that. You're trying to keep people within certain parameters, but then you miss the educational. Can you see how difficult this word is for translators? To be like, how do I describe in a single word something that is just not a part of our cultural experience? It's very difficult. That's why you have all these different words for this. So, get in your mind, at least I think child trainer, even though it fails to encapsulate everything, I think it comes the closest, just for me personally to grasp all of this. But here's the thing, what happens when the father says, okay, it's time for him to go to the master teacher? Does he go with that child trainer? Does the child trainer just keep on teaching and training next to the master? No. He has accomplished what it is that he was meant to accomplish. He accomplished it perfectly, right? He did exactly what he was supposed to do, and he prepared them for this master teacher who was going to come. And that is what Paul is comparing the law of Moses to. It said that, way back in Exodus chapter 24, when they entered into this covenant, God knew it was going to be a long time until Jesus came onto the scene. So, until then, they needed this guardian to keep them confined, teacher, to help them understand what their relationship with God is, what the covenant is all about, trainer, how to live in such a way that they can be a light, a beacon to the rest of the world. And they do that until such a time as the father says, nope, the time's come to an end. What is that time that brings the law of Moses and its purpose to an end? Jesus. And particularly, faith in Jesus. That is not the works of the law. We don't come into relationship by virtue of the works of the law. We come into relationship by faith in Jesus. So then, the law was our child trainer until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a child trainer. For in Christ Jesus, you are all, what now? You are all sons of God through faith. And this is once again that idea that the child really has no status. He's not really considered to be a true son. Don't take that too far. Does he have a father-son relationship with the father? Yes. Is he part of the family? Yes. But his ability to act as part of the family, have any official capacity, be a part of it, is not there. And now what Paul is saying is, hey, this isn't just for those wealthy kids. Now, who is a part of this? Now that faith has come, this has been opened up to whom? Anybody and everybody. He says, verse 27, as many of you as have been baptized into Christ, you have put on Christ. Now, you're not separated. There's no distinctions. There are no more separations. There's no Jew nor Greek. There's no slave nor free. There's no male nor female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ, then you are now, what? Abraham's offspring and heirs according to the promise. This goes back, right, to chapter 3, verse 7. It is those of faith who are the what? All right, it's those of faith who are the sons of Abraham. And so you got this little inclusio type thing going on right here. By faith, you become sons. How does that happen? All of this discussion, we come to the end right here. If you are Christ, you are Abraham's sons. Abraham's, by the way, offspring, what's another word for that again? Seed. Right there. You are part of that. Christ is the seed, and we are joining Christ. We're putting on Christ. All of this now, we are a part of, heirs according to the promise. Chapter 4, the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave. Remember we talked about that? No different from a slave. Again, status is what's under discussion. It doesn't mean that they sent their sons out into the fields or things like that. But as far as, his ability to speak for the family and do stuff, even though he is the owner of everything, but he is under guardians and managers, the child trainers, until the date set by the father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, we were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law so that we might receive adoption as sons. Now, this is where it gets really interesting for these Israelites. Because remember, what did they assume about themselves here? That what? I'm sorry? They were the seed. That they are the fulfillment. They are the conduit. They are the gatekeepers. I don't know, whatever reference, throw another one in there. You could come up with a few, I'm sure. But they are the ones who are special. And if anyone wants to get to Jesus, they have to go through Israel and the Israelites and the law. They have to go through that to get there. That's how special they are. They're like, the assistants to the regional manager type of thing. They're the ones that you have to go through them in order to get to Christ. How does Paul describe their relationship? What did Jesus have to do? Verse 4, when the fullness of time had come and God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, he did it why? Yeah, to redeem those under the law. Keep going, Ryan. One more phrase. All right, say that again into the mic. Go ahead.
That we might receive adoption to sonship.
All right. Can you see what Paul's doing right here by flipping things on its head? He says that Jesus came not to give these guys a big pat on the back and say, man, I'm glad you're here holding the line. I'm glad I've got someone on my side and all of y'all around so that all the rest of the world can flow through you to get to me. Instead, what's he saying about these people who think they're the seed and the most important? What do they need? They need redemption. And they're also not what? They're also not sons. That would take some time to sink in for these Israelites. It says you need to be redeemed and adopted. Because they would say, whoa, Paul, no. We are the sons. We're the official sons. We're the rightful sons. We're the true sons. And he says, no. You still need to be adopted because you're not the proper sons by faith in Jesus. This is a new system. There's a new thing going on, and you don't have this special status that you think you do. You're on the exact same scenario, same level, same plane, same everything else as all these Gentiles. You need redemption and adoption just as much as they do. You're all equal together. All right? Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
It kind of makes me wonder, and I guess we'll never know, how many of this group that Paul's talking to, how many of them had an aha moment at this point, and how many of them were, as you described, were going to struggle with chewing on this a little bit.
That is an excellent speculative thought, because, I would think that there would be a number who would say, whoa, hold on, Paul. No, we are the sons. They're the ones who need to be adopted into us. And, there probably were some who would have said, okay, I'm going to have to think about this, work through this, understand this. But I think this really would have hit home to a lot of people in different ways. But he goes on to say, because you are sons, adopted sons, right? Now, because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Probably the word used for daddy, although I think that sometimes this gets a little overstated, and people make too much of this. It is just the word for father. It doesn't have to be a little kid saying daddy. It can just simply be a word for father, Abba, Father. But it's the Aramaic. It would be what little Hebrew children running around in Galilee would call their father, Abba. So Abba, Father, so you are no longer a slave. That is, the time of the child trainer is past. It's finished. And anybody who is in Christ, who has put on Christ, has now joined with Christ as sons who are no longer slaves. You're no longer that status. Now you have full, complete status. And if you are a son, then you are an heir. You now have an inheritance. An inheritance that is not based in any way, shape, or form upon Israel being the seed. It's an inheritance that's based on faith in Jesus Christ. All right, any questions or comments? Last chance before we close up, because the bell's about to ring, I do believe. I saw Richard meander that way. Oh, there it is. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Good class.